Welcome back to Smoky Hill Bonsai. This is part 2 of learning how to design a backyard landscape. As I mentioned before, we recently moved into a new house and we've got a new blank backyard. This is part 2 of the Design Your Backyard series, so I encourage you to go back and watch number 1 if you have not already. And for those of you who have watched it already, I hope that you had some time to go out and take some measurements of your backyard or front yard or whatever space that you would like to work on and have the drawing ready. So what I'm going to do today is I've got a piece of tracing paper, and what I like to do is lay the tracing paper down on the drawing that we've already completed. I will redraw that through there quickly. What I'm going to do is turn the camera around, put my tracing paper down, we'll speed through that tracing real quick, and then I'll show you the very next step. Here I have just some basic tracing paper, and I'm going to take this and I'm going to use this blue painter's tape again and just tape the corners down so it doesn't move, and we can run our pens and rulers and stuff all over it and keep it in the spot we would like to have it. And just a quick review, this is drawn out in a 10:1 scale, so I've been using architectural scale here. And as we look at this, every inch, 1, 2, 3, 4 inches, each one of those represents 10 feet on the drawing. Using a scale like this is going to help us make sure everything kind of gets plotted into place correctly, and then it's going to later help us do the math when we have to measure for plants or for mulch or anything like that. So I'm going to speed this up. I'm going to quickly trace over this, and then we'll talk about the next step. Okay, so I quickly traced it out again. We're ready for the next step. We're going to start thinking about space now. We're still not worried about exactly where things are going to go, exactly how much space in between objects. We're not worried about where plants go right now. We're just going to concentrate on how to use the space. We now have to remember what the purpose is of why we are designing this and what do we want to have in our space. So we know, number 1, we need a space for play. We also know that we want to incorporate a space where we can entertain guests. So we want to have an area for entertaining. We would like to have a space to do some gardening. And then, of course, we want a space for bonsai. So the next thing we'll do is draw a bubble diagram. And we'll just quickly lay out space for that stuff. Now, the size of that space right now isn't extremely important. We'll go back and incorporate items that we want into that space, and then we can adjust that. Right now, we are just putting an idea on paper. So, like I said, we know that we want a place for playing. So let's put that there. So the next thing we want to think about is, where will we entertain? And I believe that if we're serving refreshments like cocktails or appetizers, or even just having a full-fledged barbecue, it would be more convenient to get things from the house into this area here as opposed to somewhere way back into the garden. So I'm going to work with the idea that we will entertain closer to the house and closer to the kitchen. So I'm going to draw a bubble that incorporates that space. Now that doesn't mean we'll use that whole space for that reason, but that's just reserve the area. This fence line is our southern fence line. And I looked at it the other day when it was still sunny outside, and that low winter sun is casting a little shadow off that fence. But I anticipate before we get into planting season that shadow won't be much of an obstacle in getting sun into our space. I've also already thought about shade trees back here. So we're going to have to decide at some point in time which is more important to us or how to make this fit. So right now, what I'm thinking is we'll have a garden space here. Let's fill that in. Garden. Now, if I really want to add those shade trees, I could probably incorporate trees and other plants. Trees, let's put trees and shrubs. So then we're to the space for bonsai. I'm going to roughly add in this space right here. Okay, so let's write bonsai. Now the way I kind of see that going is down in this area I could do some raised beds and I can grow some seedlings out back here. And then up front I can maybe put my benches in again. And maybe that we can incorporate the way the benches fit in somehow with our entertaining patio so I can show those off a little bit. So you look at this and you see we reserve space here, some garden space, all that. But then there's still blank areas. That's okay because all of that will end up blending together. As we move forward on thinking about design, shapes will change. This garden shape that I drew as a circle may end up becoming more oblong. It may fit into a back corner. We may end up with built-in planter beds behind our entertaining space. So we may have some shrubs here that act as a backdrop to kind of separate that. We could come off the entertaining space and build a little more intimate seating area. So we have that stuff available. The other thing that we really need to think about is how we can move through the backyard. Now, right now, there's only one gate in the backyard. So if we have to go through there with a trencher to run a water line or a conduit, or if we decide to do brick patios back here, we could probably rent a small machine like a dingo or something that can move pallets back. So we know that's going to work there for us. So we would enter into the space this direction. The other thing that I think is important while we think about moving forward with this design is we have a privacy fence around the whole yard. I don't know how old that fence is, but I know that we've already had some issues with some posts rotting off the ground, sharing with our neighbors, and our neighbors so graciously about the first or second week we lived here replaced that. But thinking about the fence, thinking about maintenance, if we ever need to go in there and replace pickets or replace sections, or you never know, one day we may have to go in and replace it all, depending on how the whole thing works. I want to make sure that we save space around all of this fence line to work. Now that doesn't have to be a lot of space, but If we've got a whole bunch of bonsai benches growing right up or placed right up next to the fence line and we have to fix that, we don't want to be stepping over them, potentially stepping on trees in the garden or whatever. Same thing, growing vegetables back here or other plants. We're going to make sure we save space for all of that. The other thing that we will think about is the power poles sit off of our property but on to the property behind us, and our transformer is over here, and the power lines and all that come in to the corner of the house here. So thinking about that, we know we're not going to put a trampoline directly under that. The current play structure sets over here, so if we end up having to move it or do something else, we'll pay attention to that line also. Trees and shrubs, I'm not going to plant trees that will grow up and then grow over into those power lines, so we'll pay attention to how that sets. Because I drew it like this, doesn't mean this has to be the way we continue to move forward. I might think about this for a couple hours, I might think about it overnight, and it might make more sense to shift gardening space down closer to bonsai and go ahead and put the trees back in the corner like I was thinking. Maybe it'll make sense to do some gardening up here and have a nice little path that comes back, and maybe a smaller patio and a smaller patio back underneath the shade trees. I may be able to move the shade trees closer to the patio and shade that patio a little bit better. As a matter of fact, while I'm thinking about that, because I said that, let's just go ahead and do that. Let's draw another circle here that combines these two. I'll lay another sheet of paper over top of this. We'll leave all this as the idea, and then we'll start working on that. Okay, so I've got a new sheet of tracing paper laid down. I'm going to trace it all again, the original drawing, and then we'll start thinking about the size of that space. Okay, so I think that's a good place to stop for today. So we created a bubble diagram. So after we got our lot drawn out and we know what we need in for space, for example, we had the play area, the entertaining area, the bonsai area, the gardening area, we just quickly reserved space for that. The next step will be to start to define that space a little bit better. Now, I hope you're following along with this, and if you want to do your own landscape as we go, I'd really encourage you to do that. You don't have to have a fancy space to work. You can use your kitchen table or your countertop. You could use graph paper and a pencil. Just get the measurements as accurately as you can, get them plotted out onto your paper. I would be really interested to know in the comment section if you're following along. Tell me what kind of problems you might be having or at what stage you are in this process. And as we close out 2020 and get ready for 2021, we'll define our spaces and be ready for spring to install this landscape. So take care, everybody, and we'll see you again real soon for part 3.